seeking shelter, I moaned to myself, "Curse Caesar and his census," I said, and not for the first time that day. Every son of Bethlehem comes home to a town with only one inn, my scrawny little inn. Just some water, a stable around back, some bare rooms around a little courtyard, a little tiny place that I call my own. I guess the views aren't bad. Well, actually, here's the deal. I'll provide the fire, but you can cook your own food, thank you very much. I guess the views aren't too bad. There's Jerusalem in the distance. Bethlehem's up on a hill. You know, you always climb up to Bethlehem. From there, you can see the valley tumble out before you, and alongside it, roadways and farms stretching off into the distance. On a clear day, Jerusalem is in sight, an easy sight. That's how close we are. So when there's a special day, a holy day, or a festival, we'll rent out every space we've got, right down to space on the ground for pitching a tent. But whatever space we've had has been booked up for a few days. Personally, I'll be glad when it's quiet again, when the travelers leave and head back home. Some innkeeper I am. You know, sometimes I wish I hadn't gone into the family business, hadn't followed the script. What would my life have been like if I'd chosen another path, if I'd left Bethlehem altogether? Who knows? Instead, I married the girl next door, and we settled down to start Well, fact is, I've never been more than 2 days' journey down the road. I've spent my entire life right here on the outskirts of David's city. For generations, our family has offered shelter to travelers, people on their way home, people leaving home, people who don't call any place home anymore. As a boy, I loved to hear the travelers' stories. At night, I'd sneak up to the fire, and I'd get close. Not so close they'd tell me to scamper away, but close enough so I could listen. I was fascinated with their stories. Stories of exotic places, expensive goods, extraordinary adventures. There were soldiers, and there were merchants. There were thieves, and there was royalty, and all of them with stories. But over the years, I realized that all of their stories were pretty much the same. Everyone who passed through this inn was searching for rest, for safety, people to be with, for a place that felt like home. And that's what I wanted to offer. I wanted to offer people a place that felt like home. So when I inherited the place from my father, I fixed it up. I repaired a few walls, I cleaned out the stable, I reset the fire pit. I thought that's all it would take to make the place a little more homey. But it turns out there's a lot more to making a home than 4 walls and a roof. And besides, who am I to offer a home to others when I've never found it myself? Oh well, the years have passed quickly, and since the census, my full-time job has been turning people away, and that's what I was doing when the knock came. "So we have no room," I shouted without even getting up from my supper. "Go away," I shouted when the knock came a second time. Finally, I got up from my dinner and I went to the door and opened it, and there they were. A young couple, husband and wife, it looked like. Dirty from the road, but beneath that you could tell these people were poor. He was standing there in the doorway, and she was sitting nearby on a rock beside an ancient beast that at one time might have been a donkey. They were a sight. Dirty from the roads, grimy clothes, dust-caked feet, exhaustion in her eyes, and desperation in his. Please, he began, but I cut him off. We have no room. We're all full. And I went to close the door, and just then, the woman shifted on the rock and let out a little groan, and that's when I noticed. To say that this woman was pregnant was an understatement. Even a fool like me can see when a woman's time is near. Well, seeing that I noticed, he asked again, "Please, can we stay?" But this time, I was more certain than ever that the answer was no. 100 times, 1,000 times no, and I slammed the door in his face. Or at least I tried to slam it. Since the change in the weather, that door hasn't shut proper in a week. "Will these people never stop coming?" I heard my wife say. And just then I realized I was sweating. I did not want my wife to see this couple. Joanna, just let me say this, that if my wife were to see a woman about to give birth, it would only upset her. Well, meanwhile, on the outside of the door, the man was still pleading, "Please, open up in the name of our God." God, I thought to myself, now you're bringing God into it? What God, I wanted to say. The God who stood by while my wife lost one and then another baby long before their time to be born. The God who took away my dreams of having a son, my wife's dignity, our desire for a family, a home, a future. Bring your God down here to us. I have some questions for him, I wanted to say. I'm not much of an innkeeper. I guess I'm not much of a Jew either. Oh, by birth, sure, but in my heart, she's never felt real to me like it has for some other people. Oh, as a younger man, I gave my gifts at the temple. I prayed the prayers. I tried to keep the law. And always looking to see if there was some sort of sign, to see if someone was watching, if anything I did mattered. Well, there were times I prayed as strong as any man can pray, but there was nothing coming my way. It seemed like God was coming to other people, but not to us. I'm sure he's out there somewhere, but he's just not here, not with us. Just then, the door opened inward a crack, and a dusty hand poked through right at the spot where the door had stuck in the frame. And the man poked his head through the door and tapped on the frame where the door had stuck. He said, "I can fix this and anything else around the place that needs fixing. Please, let us stay, even with the animals. I am of the house and the line of David. This is my town, and my wife needs rest." A descendant of David? This man? I thought to myself. He seemed like a decent guy in a tough spot, aren't we all? But a descendant of David? I couldn't see it. You'd never have picked him out of a crowd. But looking at his hands, I believed what he said about being able to fix the door and the other things around the place. And I heard myself saying, "Fine. If you want to stay with the animals, that's fine with me. It's your choice. I'll charge you what's fair." Before I knew it, the man was gone. Before I even had a chance to ask him if he had the means to pay. I heard him explain to his wife that they'd be staying in the stable. I expected her to complain. Instead, she praised God. I went back to my dinner. Cold by now. I said, a young couple's going to stay in the stable, not wanting to make much of it. "In the stable?" she asked. "Why did you let them stay?" "Well," I said, she's well along with child," avoiding her eyes. "Of course she would be," Joanna said, and slammed a pan down on the table. You'd think, for a man as exhausted as I was, that I would have slept well. But I tossed and turned for hours, listening to dogs bark and the wind whistle. Finally, I dozed off. But then, just before dawn, An absolute ruckus woke me from sleep. It was outside the inn, not in the front, but in the back, as if some bandits came from the hills and were after the livestock that all the travelers have stabled. I jumped out of bed to see what was going on and saw a crowd of men passing behind the stable, behind the inn toward the stable. I went out ready to fight them all off, and then one of the men gently took me by the arm and said, "Come and see." I could tell these guys weren't bandits, so I went with them, and we tumbled into the stable. And there, to my everlasting shame, lying in a trough where I fed hay to the animals, was a baby, wrapped in the shabbiest cloths you could imagine, eyes shut tight, shutting this fresh new world out. The woman was sitting nearby, lying nearby, and sat up when we came in. I said, please, excuse us. And I turned to chase the shepherds away. I thought the least I could give is give her some privacy. But as I turned, I looked at the shepherds, and all of them were kneeling, were silent, were reverent. I'd never seen a reverent shepherd in my whole life. And here were a dozen of them, old and young, one leaning on a cane, one with tears in his eyes, one humming a tune. What was going on? Who were these people? Who was this child? "Why have you come?" I heard someone say. I didn't even know who said it. Was it the husband? Was it me? One of the shepherds, the oldest and bentest one, said, "The angel sent us." And with that, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. But I looked at the woman, and her face burst into a big smile, and she said, "You saw the angel." Must have been post-birth delirium. One of the shepherd boys said, "Not just one angel, 100 angels. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord." And then there was a song. There was no mistaking it. These shepherds had seen something, some kind of vision, some apparition. Something was going on here. Another one said, and the angel said there'd be a sign. "You will find a baby wrapped in cloths, lying in a manger." What was going on? Well, just then, the baby cried and must have been hungry. And I noticed the flies buzzing around my head and the horses stomping for their morning feeding. The morning air was cool, but boy, it was getting very warm in that stable, and I was having a hard time breathing. So I stepped outside to get some fresh air and asked myself, what was happening? Angels, shepherds, signs. And then I heard a voice. It was in my head, but it was as if someone was speaking to me, and the words were familiar. I remembered them for the times that I used to pay attention in the temple. From Isaiah, I think. "For unto you is born this day a child. For unto us a son is given. For unto us a child is born." Yes, familiar words. Words that long ago I had decided could not be for me. They might be for some other person, some other place, some other time, but not for us. Back inside the inn, Joanna was getting the morning's bread ready. I said, "Baby's born," not wanting to dwell on it. "Some shepherds came to see." Joanna was quiet. And then a few minutes later, those shepherds left town just the same way they came in, loud. They were shouting to everyone that Israel's Messiah had been born. And right outside our window, one of them shouted, "Glory to God in the highest." And the little kid added, "And peace on earth." And Joanna looked at me. And then put down the dough, dusted off her hands, and walked out the door and headed toward the stable. Wait, Joanna. I hurried after I knew that nothing good could come of this. I had to be with her. The truth is, I wanted to get another look at that baby to see if I could see if any of this was true. We arrived at the door of the stable at just about the same time and stepped quietly in. Now, any baby deserves better than to be born in a stable. But this baby, and in fact, I know that many children are born in cozier rooms with warmer fires and softer cloths. But this baby had something that all of Caesar's gold could never buy. Love and peace filled that room. The room was thick with love and peace. You could feel it. He looks like you, the mother said with a big smile, and they both laughed about it as if it was some kind of joke. Couldn't quite figure out why, but and then he looked at her and he looked at the baby with such tenderness. I thought my heart would cave in. All those old feelings of disappointment and loss rushed to the surface. I remembered all those things I had wanted and all those dreams that had gone. I thought my heart would break. It was too difficult. I didn't know if I could bear it, but I couldn't look away either. He said, "He's ours." But then again, he's not. Again, I didn't understand what he meant, but when he said those words, the woman tensed and drew that baby close to herself and tucked him in as if to say, no one in all the world's ever going to take him from me. And then she looked at us. She said, "We can tell you a story. You might find it hard to believe." "Try me," I said. "I think I've heard every story there is." But the story she told, story of an angelic visitation, a dream, a baby conceived by God himself, an honorable husband who marries a girl carrying a child not his own. I'd never heard a story like that. Never heard a story like that. What was going on? Who were these people? What was this? To be honest, I hate to admit it, my first thought was she'd hoodwinked him, and hoodwinked him good. But looking at them closely, I realized that couldn't be true. There was nothing dishonorable about them at all. They didn't seem foolish or naive or deceitful. They seemed honest and open and brave. In fact, the word holy popped into my head, but I quickly pushed it aside. I asked, "So you think this baby is the Messiah?" "Yes," she said, just like that. But how can the Messiah be an infant?" I asked. "He'll grow, and God will be with us." God with us, I wondered. "Can I hold him?" I heard Joanna say. And the look in her eye was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was like fire and rain at the same time. I didn't know if she was angry or jealous or joyful. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was next. I mean, our life may not have been all that we hoped. Our family may not have been what we had hoped for. But we were doing fine, weren't we? I spoke to Joanna. What are you doing? We can't keep him. He's not ours. She ignored me. She knelt down, moved forward, and the mother placed the baby in her arms. I held my breath. For a few moments, Joanna looked into the baby's eyes, and then she looked to me. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't look sad. She looked happy, satisfied. And I didn't know what to do. I held back. And then the women leaned a little closer and exchanged some words I couldn't hear. But then I heard it. My wife. She laughed. My wife laughed. It's a miracle, I said to no one. And the husband heard me and said, yeah, and he's only a day old. Just then I remembered back earlier in the day. I had demanding God that God should come down here and be among us, that he should show himself to us, that he should come to this rundown inn we called home just to see what it was like. And I realized if what these people were saying to us was true, then God had come down. God had come to us. But why? Why would God do such a thing as this? Anything could happen to this baby. This world is no safe place for an infant. Why would God put this child, his child, at such risk? I know that if I had a child, I'd never give him up like this. I'd never put him at risk by sending him to live among broken people like us. All these things, angels, the shepherds, a baby born and placed in a manger, my wife's tears, they were upsetting everything, the balance we had worked so hard to achieve. And yet, I sensed that something important was happening. Something very important, perhaps world-shaking, was happening right at my fingertips. Could this be anything other than a work of God? And I didn't want to slam the door shut on this like I'd almost done on that young couple. Joanna gave the baby back to the mother, and I breathed a sigh of relief. And then she looked at me with imploring eyes. And I knew exactly what she wanted because I wanted it too. I spoke to them. Please, excuse me for being so rude earlier. Please, come, stay with us. Bring the baby into our inn. Come, lodge with us. It was a crazy offer. We were full and all these big, deep feelings percolating up. But somehow I sensed that after all these years of trying to offer home to other people, that these strangers, this baby, had brought home to us. Welcoming them, welcoming this child into our lives would make our house into a home, a place that felt like home. At last, a place with rest, true belonging, and peace. But wait, I said, do you think those shepherds are coming back? The man laughed and said, God only knows. And then he smiled. And in his smile, I thought I got a glimpse of the smile of God.